morning, everybody. It's an honor and privilege for me to open this particular track. I apologize, I may have to sit in a few minutes because unfortunately I have a knee injury, that's why the chair is here. But I have the pleasure to deliver today a presentation and intervention on cybersecurity threat landscape, especially with a focus on the LEO satcom systems. My talk will include three kind of main elements. First one, I'll give a very brief introduction of ENISA, the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, for those who are not familiar. Then I will present the LEO satellites, LEO satcom cybersecurity assessment, and then finish the presentation with some conclusions and recommendations. So for those who've never heard of ENISA, hopefully most of you had, we are one of the EU agencies. We're actually located not in Brussels, but in sunny Greece, in Athens. Our main mandate is to support various stakeholders at the European Union, starting from European Commission and member states, and then of course going toward private sector, both large organizations and SMEs as well, private citizens, in achieving high level of cybersecurity across the entire European Union. You can see that we cover the topic of cybersecurity from very, very different, perspective, from very different topics. We support the Commission in develop and implementation of various cybersecurity policies, for example, NIS2 directive, a very, very soon upcoming AI Act, and for those who are interested, the last I heard it's supposed to be formally adopted on the 21st of May, so keep your eye on this. We, of course, cooperate with various search organizations in operational capacity. We provide assistance in capacity building by organizing various cybersecurity exercises, develop knowledge in many aspects of cybersecurity, and provide education and so on. And I probably could talk about work of ENISA for an hour, and that would be not enough, so let me skip. Now, since the subject of this session is cybersecurity assessment and threat landscape of LEO satellites, so I will start with basically presenting our methodology that we use for developing various threat landscapes. And just for your information, any publications, any guidelines that ENISA prepares, you can go to enisa.europa.eu website and download them for free, and you can also find our formal methodology for the threat landscapes on our website. So when we talk about developing a threat landscape for various topics, for various domains, whether it's a horizontal or vertical, there are usually these common elements. So obviously you need the context. Is this a threat landscape that is a general nature that we actually publish on an annual basis? Is this a threat landscape for, let's say, a specific technology? I had the pleasure to also work on, for example, an AI threat landscape, to understand the various threats, vulnerabilities that are present, that needs to be identified or used for as a basis of analysis. Obviously, it is necessary to understand what is a particular life cycle and associated actors of this context of this threat landscape. And then, of course, everybody needs to remember that assets are what we need to protect. Therefore, without knowing a good asset taxonomy and understanding their importance, we cannot really move to the most important element of the threat landscape, which is basically threat taxonomy. It's actually threats, vulnerabilities, it's also threat actors. And then last but not least, when we conduct this type of study analysis, we basically provide some sort of cybersecurity recommendations that are associated with particular threat landscape. So giving the general overview of ENISA and how we develop this type of analysis, now I will focus on how we've done our analysis of the LEO satcom sector. Starting from the first topic that I have mentioned in our threat landscape methodology, obviously we look at the information that is available about different LEO satellite constellations, about what are possible implementations, what are the purposes, whether they cover specific sectors or maybe, industry specific. So that's the part of developing a context of a threat landscape for LEO satellites. The second part of the context, and what I'm showing you, of course, everybody probably who is at this conference already knows this, is understanding the architecture, the framework. So obviously we, because we could, for example, focus our threat landscape analysis on particular segment of the satellite infrastructure, but in our case we actually have done this all the way across all the segments, the control, the space, and the user segment. For the life cycle of satellite systems, we actually have done extensive analysis of life cycle that have been published by various important organizations that include, for example, various space agencies in Europe, including ESA, USPA. We of course look at US solutions. We also look at the proposed life cycles that were developed by various cybersecurity organizations, for example, BSI here in Germany. We look at the Japanese Space Agency, and our proposal for the generic life cycle, and keep in mind that this is a generic life cycle, but when we develop this threat landscape, we of course trying to provide guidelines that can be then used and customized by every reader or stakeholder. So this is our, of course, proposal for the generic life cycle that starts from the design development and of course ends in the commissioning. And maybe with the stages such as launch or on-orbit check, it of course looks very much similar to a life cycle of many other digital systems. Of course, has some specific stages, but it should not be surprised that it follows a very similar pattern, because when we talk about cybersecurity, we're talking about cybersecurity by design, cybersecurity by default, security for the entire life cycle, and it's of course very important not to forget all the stages, all the processes, including of course when something is being decommissioned and disposed of, including data. Satellite sector, satellite industry is of course a very complex industry with very many stakeholders, many actors, and we basically have done a very in-depth analysis of various actors that are involved in at least the core activities, so like development, supporting, operations. By the way, all I'm talking about is in a report available on ENISA website. Just go to ENISA website, type in the search bar LEO, and you'll find this report in extremely detail. So what I'm giving you here is a very abbreviated version, because obviously in 20 minutes it's not enough. So, and of course slides as well will be available for assuming that CYSAT distribute the slides. So no need to make notes if you do it. Of course, you're more than welcome to do it. Asset taxonomy, as I mentioned, is extremely important, because it's the assets then determine what kind of threats and vulnerabilities, what kind of risk can be identified in response to evaluation of these assets, their importance, criticality when they are compromised. Again, this you can see this basically just right now as a very high overview. because there is a lot of assets that are necessary for a LEO constellation or any satellites to operate. One thing that is very important when assets are being analyzed, that actually also applies to the actors, is that, of course, this is an industry that has a high dependence on supply chain, on external third-party vendors. So it is also absolutely necessary to remember that when this analysis of actors and assets is done, it's not only the internal part of organization that perhaps operates satellites, but also all the supply chain that gets on which the final operator of satellite services depends on when putting a satellite constellation in operation. And I'm not sure why this doesn't show up. Okay, something is wrong with the slides, because of course there were examples of various threats. Let me see. No. Okay. I swear to God, it worked on my laptop. Who is a software engineer? I used to be a software engineer. Not knows what I'm talking about, so I'm not sure. Okay, so I will try to speak from memory. Of course, I should be able to remember. So of course, non-malicious threats could be misconfiguration of some of the infrastructure, non-compliance with some of the regulations. That could be not only the cybersecurity but also safety regulations, physical compromise of the infrastructure, or but whether it's a ground infrastructure or infrastructure in space, or sometimes an attack can come through user infrastructure that of course connects to the satellite system. And then malicious threats, so space specific would be software that has been loaded into either the bus, or maybe command and control has not been extensively tested, or it's lacking proper change management process, misconfiguration of networks. The most well-known, considered always the highest threat, people, humans who act maliciously, and this could be either the external or the insider, dissatisfied, disgruntled employees. I've mentioned about the supply chain. So if there is a vendor that provides components or software which are not at the same level of security as the organization, obviously this needs to be considered as a threat and have appropriate countermeasures. Associated risk. Okay.
Problem. I'm not sure if you hear me. Okay.
Yes, I hear.
Yeah, I'm really sorry for that. I think when we put the PPT on Google Drive, it gave this, but we didn't notice that. So it's our fault. Sorry again. And please, you can.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, then maybe I'll just skip the technical risk and non-risk, but of course there could be associated risk with the threats that I have mentioned. Please go and download the report, and you will see them not described only in the 4 blocks, but in a very detail, so you probably will be much better. Okay, so I've showed you how we basically look at the current state of the LEO satellite constellations from the context of the threat landscape, how we have documented in our study what is the life cycle, what are the essential assets, actors, threats, vulnerabilities and risk, and of course associated threat actors. And our recommendations based on this cybersecurity assessment of the constellations are like this. Always start with the risk management. Again, it's just an IT infrastructure. It is, of course, a mix of digital and physical infrastructure of specific functionality, but it is an IT infrastructure. Therefore, conduct good risk management, risk analysis, and do this for the entire life cycle of this system. Our next recommendation is a multi-layer approach. And that actually also stems from our recently published multi-layer approach framework for good cybersecurity practices in AI. But that framework actually would apply to any type of technology. So the first approach, the first recommendation is that do this, treat this as the holistic system. So make sure that your supporting infrastructure is properly secured. And that also includes not only the physical technical infrastructure, but also supporting processes, policies, people. Then, of course, look at the specific threats, vulnerabilities that are applicable to satellite systems, and then identify appropriate countermeasures. And then it is also important to take the context of this sector and look what are specific cybersecurity recommendations and measures that are specific to particular sector, in this case, of course, to satellite sector. Where to find the additional information about, for example, specific measures, specific recommendations. There's actually not quite a few of them already published. They may not always include just cybersecurity topics. Sometimes this is part of, a larger documentation. But again, examples, NIST space documentation, BSI, CCSDS, and they provide recommendations and good practices for different aspects of the satellite systems. And to summarize, what I'd like to share with you is basically some conclusions. So we need to remember these are complex and costly systems. Of course, the cost of satellites is getting low, and especially when we're talking about maybe even microcubes, it's getting, to the point that I could possibly, splurge and buy myself one. But still, they very often, especially in the telecom sector, they provide public available electronic communication services, meaning that they may be, very important for critical services, for communication with the citizens of organizations. So they have to be assessed and secured holistically. We cannot forget that, especially in the current times, even if it wasn't intended purpose of particular satellite constellations, they could be a dual-use system. And that, of course, very often create, problem or potential risk that you may be overridden in your operating of the satellites by the military decisions. So you have to take this into account as well. That perhaps it's part of the context, that is part of your security assessment. There's many different types of attacks that can be executed. Cyber attacks can be executed against satellites, but of course, the most common ones is basically to either to disrupt the communication or deny the access, because that is, you don't have to completely destroy the satellite. As long as it's not operational or doesn't function correctly, then of course you have a problem, and you need to take into account various type of threats. The typical ICT threats, compromise of a network, compromise of access control system, but also you have to take into account threats that come from various, space operations that, of course, could be also, space debris that, will damage the satellite. And that actually might have, an effect on cybersecurity of that system, because, while communication with the satellites might be still operational, upgrading or replacing particular software is not always easy. And risk-based approach and the holistic approach, holistic security measures. And I believe I am almost at the end of my time. So thank you very much for listening to what I had to share, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. Thank you. And I will sit now I will sit.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Monika. And sorry again for the technical issue. So I don't see any questions here for this talk from the audience. Then I will probably take the opportunity to ask a question myself. For all the security recommendations that we are supposed to apply for space, for satellites in general, but more probably for LEO, because we all understand that they are lacking security more compared to geosatellite for now. Is it a generic and independent of the type of mission? Because as a cybersecurity company ourselves, we sometimes face the challenge of people saying, oh, my mission is not processing or collecting any sensitive data, so I don't really need to implement security.
So this is an age-old question, because yes, despite the fact that security by design, security by default are concepts that are old, I don't know, 20 years old or so, yes, especially when small organizations start services, of course their priority is, business case, money, and sadly it actually wins until the very first cyber incident. So I've dealt with this in various sectors and domains where when I work, during my overall career. I cannot think of a responsible behavior, because it's very difficult sometimes to predict in the foreseeable future what possible negative consequences of this supposedly benign satellite system can happen when it's compromised. Doesn't matter, is it critical, sensitive data? Does it matter if it's a personal data? It's processing and it can be taken advantage. What if such a benign satellite system, or satellites, even a single satellite, get used to actually generate a physical collision with a critical satellite? And that could, for example, happen simply because that small satellite wasn't properly secure. So security is always and has to be at the beginning of every design and implementation and an operation.
Cannot agree more. Thank you. We actually have a question from Luca Gambazzi. Okay. Are we going to see it? I don't know.
Can you read the question?
But probably I will read it then. So Luca says, do you monitor, collect information cyber attacks on satellites and space infrastructure?
Right now, we don't collect information on incidents with one exception. So any satellites that are part of the telecommunications sector, they have an obligation to report incidents via their competent authorities, and then they are being reported under, up until recently, European Cybersecurity Electronic Code, and as of now, under the NIS2 directive. So we do collect information. However, the information that is then publicly available, it's only aggregated data. There is, of course, an internal database that we then use for exchanging information with competent authorities and other appropriate actors on EU level. So that's our obligation. Whether we'll do a dedicated database of incidents for space, I guess that would really depends on the future EU space law, and depending on our role and mandate that will be given in this law for the space sector.
Okay, thank you very much, Monika. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.